Under the burning sun of a small West African village, a young woman named Ebony was tied to a tree for 3 long days. Her husband had died suddenly, and the villagers said she was cursed, that she had brought death into her own home. They called her evil, threw stones at her, and laughed as she cried for water. Each word they shouted hurt more than the rope cutting into her skin. Her body was weak, her lips dry, and her eyes empty. The whole village watched her suffer, believing they were serving justice. But then, one hot afternoon, a black car appeared on the dusty road. It stopped, and out stepped a man no one had ever seen before. His clothes were clean, his voice calm, but his eyes were sharp. He was from the city, a journalist named Tari, who had come to write about the cruel punishment still happening in forgotten villages. When he saw Ebony tied to that tree, something inside him broke. Without a word, he walked through the crowd, untied her trembling hands, and covered her with his jacket. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. The crowd went silent. For the first time in days, Ebony felt hope. The man who stepped out of the black car wasn't from their world. His name was Tari, a young journalist from the city. He had come to the village after hearing stories of village justice, where people were punished without proof, without mercy. The heat was strong, and the air was thick with dust and silence. Tari looked around and saw the villagers gathered under a large tree, their faces filled with anger and fear. Then his eyes found her, Ebony. She was tied tightly to the tree, her wrists swollen and bleeding, her dress torn and dirty. Her eyes were open, but they looked empty, as if her soul had already left her body. Tari felt something break inside him. He had seen pain before, but nothing like this. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, a living, breathing woman treated worse than an animal. He dropped his camera and rushed toward her. The villagers shouted at him to stop. "She's cursed," they yelled. "Don't touch her. She killed her husband." But Tari didn't listen. His heart was louder than their voices. He took out a small knife from his pocket and cut the rope. Ebony fell forward, too weak to stand, and he quickly caught her in his arms. He could feel how light she was, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Gently, he placed his jacket around her shoulders. He turned to the crowd, his eyes burning with anger. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice steady and cold. Something in the way he spoke made everyone freeze. The laughter stopped. The whispers died. Even the chief, who had stood proudly watching, looked away. Tari's words carried a weight none of them could ignore. For a long moment, no one moved. The sun beat down, and the only sound was the wind rustling the dry leaves. Tari helped Ebony walk to his car. She stumbled, but he held her steady, whispering, "You're safe now." Behind them, the villagers watched in silence, too ashamed or too afraid to speak. As they drove away, Ebony looked out the window. The village faded in the distance, the tree where she had been tied growing smaller and smaller. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was something else, relief, maybe hope. She didn't know this man, didn't even know his name yet, but she felt a strange trust in him. Tari glanced at her and saw the pain in her eyes. "You're going to be all right," he said softly. She wanted to believe him. The road ahead was long, rough, and full of dust, but for the first time in days, she felt the air move freely around her wrists. She looked at her hands and whispered a silent prayer. The nightmare was behind her now, and though she didn't know it yet, the man who untied her was about to change her life forever. Ebony followed Tari to the city. She had nothing with her, no bag, no family, no home, only the clothes she wore and the bruises that marked her skin. The city was loud and bright, so different from the quiet of her village. Cars moved fast, people hurried past, and the buildings seemed to touch the sky. Everything felt strange, but she held on to Tari's promise that her life could start again. Tari found her a small room in a women's shelter. The first night, Ebony couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tree, the ropes, the faces that had called her cursed. But morning came, and with it, a small spark of strength. She started helping at the shelter, cleaning and cooking, slowly earning the trust of the other women. Tari visited often, bringing books, clothes, and sometimes food. He encouraged her to study again, reminding her that her story wasn't over. "You're stronger than what happened to you," he told her. Weeks turned into months. Ebony learned how to read better, how to use a computer, how to write her name in neat letters. She took small jobs, washing clothes, cleaning offices, helping at a bakery. Every coin she earned gave her a bit of pride, a piece of her dignity returning. Tari never treated her like a victim, he treated her like someone who had survived something extraordinary. Then one day, a blogger wrote about her story. The title read, "The Woman Tied to a Tree and Left to Die." It spread quickly on social media. People couldn't believe such cruelty still existed. Photos of Ebony before and after, one with wounds, another with a shy smile, touched hearts across the country. The comments poured in. Some offered help, others demanded justice. Soon, big news outlets picked up the story. Reporters came to interview her. Tari sat beside her during every interview, making sure no one pushed too hard. At first, Ebony spoke softly, but as she shared more, her voice grew stronger. She told them about her husband's death, how fear and ignorance had made her village turn against her, and how one stranger's kindness saved her life. Her story traveled far beyond the city. International journalists started calling Tari for details. NGOs reached out, offering support, therapy, and even scholarships. Ebony was overwhelmed, but she stayed humble. She used her new platform not for pity, but for purpose. "I don't want revenge," she said in one interview. "I just want people to stop doing this to women." Soon, her face appeared on TV screens and online articles around the world. She became a symbol of survival, of strength born from pain. The same villagers who had once cursed her now saw her on their phones and radios, shining, unbroken, alive. And in that city room, Ebony looked out at the skyline one evening and whispered, "They tied me to die, but I'm still here." Months passed, and Ebony's story continued to spread. People from around the world wanted to know the woman who had survived being tied to a tree and left to die. Donations came in, messages of support flooded her phone, and strangers called her brave. One day, a well-known NGO reached out. They were organizing a big conference about women's rights and justice, and they wanted Ebony to share her story on stage. At first, she was afraid. She had never spoken in front of a crowd before. Her hands shook just thinking about it. "I don't know what to say," she told Tari. But he smiled and said, "Just tell them the truth. That's all you ever needed to do." The day of the event came. The hall was filled with people, reporters, activists, students, and leaders from different countries. Cameras flashed as Ebony walked to the stage. She wore a simple white dress, her hair tied neatly, her heart pounding so loud she could almost hear it. Tari watched from the front row, giving her a small nod. She took a deep breath and looked at the crowd. For a moment, she froze. Then she remembered the tree, the rope, and the villagers' voices. She remembered how close she had come to death, and how far she had come since then. Her voice trembled as she began, "My name is Ebony. Once, I was tied to a tree because they said I was cursed." The room went silent. She spoke slowly, each word carrying the weight of her pain and courage. She told them about her husband's death, how fear turned her neighbors against her, how no one came to help, until a stranger did. She spoke about the city, the nights she couldn't sleep, and the strength she had to find just to keep living. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but her voice didn't break. Then she paused, looked straight at the cameras, and said, "You called me cursed. But the real curse was ignorance." The hall erupted in applause. Some people stood, clapping through their own tears. Tari closed his eyes and smiled, knowing she had finally found her power. After the event, the video of her speech was posted online. Within hours, it spread across every platform, millions of views, thousands of comments, people calling her the voice of strength. Hashtags with her name trended in different countries. Celebrities shared her words, students quoted her speech, and women everywhere said she gave them courage to speak too. Ebony watched the video that night from her small room. She couldn't believe it was her, the same woman who once begged for mercy now stood tall and fearless before the world. Tari sat beside her, and she whispered, "They called me cursed." He smiled and replied, "Now they call you hope." Back in her village, life was no longer quiet. The same people who had tied Ebony to a tree and called her cursed now sat in their small homes, staring at their televisions in shock. Her face filled every screen, strong, calm, and alive. The woman they had once mocked and nearly killed was now speaking to the world with pride and power. Some villagers watched in silence, others in shame. Mothers who had thrown stones now hid their faces. Children who once laughed at her name now whispered it with awe. The chief, who had ordered her punishment, sat trembling in his chair. Reporters had arrived from the city, cameras pointed straight at his compound. They asked question after question. Why was she punished? Who decided her fate? Did anyone try to stop it? The chief could barely speak. His hands shook as sweat rolled down his face. The same confidence he once had in front of the villagers was gone. His lies were starting to crumble. Soon, the truth began to spread. Journalists started digging deeper into Ebony's husband's death, the event that had started it all. For months, everyone had believed he died because of witchcraft. The villagers said Ebony's spirit had killed him. But investigations proved something shocking. He had stolen money from the community fund, the money meant for school repairs and clean water. When the theft was discovered, he took his own life out of fear and guilt. Ebony had been innocent all along. When this truth was broadcast on national news, the entire village fell silent. The people realized they had punished the wrong person, and not just punished, but almost killed her for a lie. The same men who had tied the ropes around her wrists now looked away when reporters showed their faces. One of them confessed, crying on camera, "We didn't know. We just followed what the chief said." But excuses couldn't wash away the shame. Tari watched it all unfold from the city, sitting beside Ebony as the truth finally came to light. She said nothing, just stared at the screen, her eyes calm but heavy. It wasn't joy she felt, it was relief mixed with sorrow. She had lost so much because of fear and ignorance. But now, the world knew the truth. In the village square, the tree still stood, the same one she had been tied to. Reporters took pictures of it, calling it the Tree of Justice. The chief tried to defend himself, saying he was only following tradition, but no one believed him anymore. People began to turn away from the old customs that had destroyed lives. That night, as the village grew quiet again, her name echoed softly in the air, not as a curse, but as a reminder. Ebony, the woman who had once been left to die, had finally cleared her name and changed her story forever. Ebony returned to her village months later, not as the weak, broken woman they once tied to a tree, but as someone stronger, wiser, and full of grace. She did not come with anger or revenge in her heart. She came with something far more powerful, justice. The villagers had heard she was coming, and the air was filled with fear and curiosity. Everyone gathered quietly near the village square, the same place where her cries once echoed. When her car stopped at the edge of the dusty road, no one dared to speak. She stepped out slowly, wearing a simple white dress and holding her head high. Behind her was Tari, the man who had once untied her ropes and changed her life forever. Together they walked toward the tree, the same tree that had witnessed her pain, her humiliation, and her strength. The ropes were long gone, but the marks on the bark still told her story. She stood there for a long moment, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. Instead of tears, a soft smile formed on her face. Ebony didn't come to destroy what was left of her past. She came to rebuild it. A few months earlier, she had quietly bought the land where the tree stood. The villagers didn't know until that day. When she told them she owned it now, they gasped. But what she said next made them even more silent. "I'm not here to take revenge," she said gently. "I'm here to give your children something I never had, a chance to learn." She pointed to the open space around the tree. Construction workers had already begun laying bricks. She was building a school, right on the same ground where she had been tied and left to die. It would be a place of knowledge, not cruelty. A place where young minds would grow instead of being trapped in old superstitions. The villagers watched in awe as the building took shape over the weeks that followed. When the school finally opened, Ebony stood in front of it, surrounded by children in clean uniforms. Their laughter filled the air, replacing the cries that once haunted that space. She named the school the Roots Academy, because she wanted every child to know that even from the deepest pain, something beautiful can grow. The villagers who had once cursed her now bowed their heads when she passed. Some came to her quietly to apologize, unable to meet her eyes. "We were wrong," one old woman said, her voice trembling. Ebony simply nodded and replied, "The best apology is change." Tari stood beside her that day, watching her with pride. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. The look in his eyes said everything. The woman he had once saved now stood taller than anyone in that village. Under the shade of that same old tree, Ebony had turned her pain into purpose, her wounds into wisdom, and her story into hope. When reporters asked Ebony why she chose to return to the same village that had once tried to destroy her, she paused for a moment and smiled softly. The air around her was calm, the sun warm against her skin, and the laughter of children learning nearby floated in the background. She looked at the tree, the same one that had once held her captive, and said quietly, "They tied me to a tree thinking they buried me. But I was only growing roots." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything she had lived through. Everyone fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop to listen. The reporters stared at her, some with tears in their eyes. That one line spoke more powerfully than any speech. It wasn't just about her suffering, it was about survival, strength, and the kind of growth that pain can bring. She didn't speak of revenge, she spoke of transformation. She had taken the same ground where she had once been broken and turned it into something beautiful, a place where children learned, where hope lived, where her story reminded everyone that even darkness can give birth to light. Ebony walked around the school as she spoke, greeting the children by name. They ran up to her, laughing, showing her their drawings and books. She bent down to their level, her eyes full of warmth. "You see this place," she said to one little girl. "Long ago, people thought nothing good could grow here. But look at you all, you are proof that goodness always wins." The children clapped and giggled, not fully understanding her words, but feeling her kindness. Reporters followed her, asking more questions about her journey. One asked if she forgave the people who hurt her. She looked toward the villagers standing at a distance, their faces quiet and heavy with guilt. "Forgiveness," she said gently, "isn't for them. It's for me. I can't carry hate and hope in the same heart. So yes, I forgave them, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace." The cameras caught every word, every tear, every smile. That clip spread across the internet within hours. People shared her quote over and over, "They tied me to a tree thinking they buried me. But I was only growing roots." It became more than a sentence. It became a message of hope for anyone who had ever been broken, betrayed, or forgotten. That evening, as the sun set behind the tree, Ebony sat with Tari under its shade. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the air. Tari looked at her and said, "You did it." She smiled faintly, watching the sky turn gold and orange. "No," she said, "we did it." And as the last light of day touched her face, it was clear, Ebony was no longer just a survivor. She had become a symbol of rebirth, proof that even when life tries to bury you, you can still rise, stronger, deeper, and full of roots. That line, "I was only growing roots," soon became more than just a quote. It became the name of Ebony's foundation, a movement that helped women who had suffered from false accusations, violence, and fear. With Tari by her side, she started traveling from village to village, sharing her story and building small learning centers for women and children. Everywhere she went, people listened, not just because she had survived, but because she had turned her pain into purpose. Her foundation gave hope to hundreds, reminding them that what was once meant to break them could be the very thing that helped them rise. The same journalists who had once filmed her tied to a tree now filmed her cutting ribbons, giving scholarships, and smiling beside children who called her Mama Ebony. Her face appeared on posters, her story in schoolbooks, and her words on the walls of classrooms. She had become a symbol of courage and kindness. And as for the stranger from the city, Tari, the man who had untied her that day, he never left her side. Their bond grew quietly, built on respect, understanding, and shared purpose. One evening, as the sun set over the village, he took her hand and said, "Maybe the rope that once tried to end your life wasn't meant to destroy you. Maybe it was meant to tie us together." Ebony smiled softly, her eyes shining. Then, she whispered, "It tied my destiny too."